For many players, the heart of an RPG is its story, the promise of a journey that feels personal and worth remembering. Yet too often, we step into worlds that look impressive but fail to hold us emotionally. Characters speak, quests unfold, but the thread feels thin, leaving us detached. When writing falters, even strong gameplay can't mask the emptiness. We invest time expecting resonance, only to find the plot drifting without purpose. Weak story writing undermines the foundation of role-playing games, and across decades, this issue has surfaced again and again. So how do we recognize weak storytelling, and what lessons can we take from it? We'll look into 6 RPGs from the past 25 years that many players felt missed the mark. But this list is based on subjective research and broad sentiment, not a definitive ranking of the worst narratives. These examples are case studies, showing where weak story construction faltered and why those shortcomings left lasting impressions. To begin with, we must first understand what weak story writing is and in what forms does it take shape. Weak story writing in RPGs means narrative fails to give players a reason to care. It shows up in one-dimensional characters, plots without direction, or dialogue that doesn't build connection. Sometimes the world is rich, but the guiding story feels stitched together, leaving players unsure why they should continue. Other times, stakes are presented but never developed, turning the story into a checklist. These patterns erode immersion and make even polished mechanics feel hollow. Before diving into specific titles, let's highlight a few simple examples of how weak story writing takes shape. Flat protagonist. When the main character has no growth or clear motivation, players struggle to connect. A hero who simply goes through the motions without evolving feels more like a placeholder than a person. Aimless plot. Stories that wander without direction. Quests stacked together with no overarching thread leave players unsure why events matter. The journey feels like filler rather than purposeful adventure. Hollow dialogue. Conversations that exist only to move the player forward, without emotional nuance, break immersion. When every line feels mechanical, characters stop feeling alive. Stakes without weight. Games sometimes present a looming threat but never build tension or consequence. If the big danger doesn't affect the world or characters meaningfully, players stop caring about the outcome. Disconnected cast. When party members exist only as archetypes, the comic relief, the stoic warrior, but never interact in meaningful ways, the group feels assembled rather than bonded. This weakens the emotional core of the journey. These patterns show how quickly a story can lose its grip on players. They're not abstract flaws, they are issues that audiences have repeatedly pointed out in specific games over the years. To see how weak story writing takes shape in practice, we'll now turn to 6 JRPGs from the past 25 years that were widely criticized for their narratives. Again, this isn't a definitive or absolute. It's a reflection of community sentiment, chosen to illustrate how these pitfalls appear in real titles and why they left such lasting impressions. Case Study 1. Ephemeral Fantasia, 2000. Konami's Ephemeral Fantasia arrived on the PlayStation 2 with an ambitious premise. A repeating 5-day time loop designed to let players uncover secrets and reshape outcomes through persistence. The idea was to create tension and agency, turning each cycle into a chance to push the story forward in new ways. In execution, however, the mechanic proved more punishing than engaging. Progress was frequently undone, dialogue remained static, and character arcs failed to evolve across resets. Instead of building momentum, the loop drained immersion, leaving players detached from the narrative. Critics acknowledged the potential but pointed out the lack of emotional depth, while new fans drew unfavorable comparisons to Majora's Mask, which used similar mechanics but anchored them in strong character development and world building. Community feedback emphasized the need for clearer progression markers, more dynamic character reactions to repeated cycles, and stronger emotional stakes to justify the repetition. Many suggested shorter or more flexible loops that would allow the story to advance without exhausting player patience. Case Study 2. Unlimited Saga 2002. Square Enix released Unlimited Saga on the PlayStation 2 as an experimental take on the JRPG formula. Instead of a traditional narrative flow, the game leaned heavily into board game mechanics, dice rolls, and layered systems meant to simulate unpredictability and strategy. The intent was to create a unique storytelling experience where progression felt dynamic and outcomes varied, breaking away from the conventional JRPG structures. Players, however, found the design overwhelming and inaccessible. The rules were poorly explained, the interface confusing, and the story buried beneath mechanics that demanded constant trial and error. Rather than feeling immersive, the narrative came across as fragmented and exhausting, with little emotional payoff. Critics noted that while the ambition was clear, the lack of clarity and cohesion made the story feel secondary, leaving many players disengaged. Community feedback centered on the need for better tutorials, clearer narrative farming, and a stronger balance between mechanics and storytelling. Fans argued that the game could have succeeded if its system supported the narrative instead of overshadowing it, allowing the story to breathe rather than drown in complexity. Case Study 3. Suikoden 4 2004. Konami's Suikoden 4 followed the beloved Suikoden 2 and 3, but its narrative direction disappointed many fans. The game shifted to a naval setting with a smaller 4-character party system, aiming to simplify battles and focus on a more intimate storyline. The intent was to experiment with scale, presenting a quieter tale compared to the sprawling conflict of earlier entries. Reception, however, was lukewarm. Players felt the story lacked depth, with pacing issues and underdeveloped characters that failed to capture the emotional weight of the series. The reduced party size limited interactions, weakening the sense of camaraderie that defined earlier titles. Critics noted that while the setting was fresh, the narrative felt stripped down and disengaging, leaving fans nostalgic for the richness of Suikoden 2 and hopeful for redemption in Suikoden 5. Community feedback often called for stronger character arcs, more meaningful dialogue, and a return to the larger ensemble storytelling that gave the series its identity. Many argued that the naval theme could have worked if paired with a more compelling plot and deeper exploration of the cast. Case Study 4. Lunar Dragon Song 2005. As the first Lunar title on the Nintendo DS, Dragon Song carried the weight of a respected franchise known for heartfelt storytelling. The developers aimed to modernize the series with handheld accessibility, introducing mechanics that encouraged constant combat and item grinding. The idea was to balance portable play with a straightforward narrative, hoping to appeal to a new audience while retaining the charm of earlier entries. Instead, the game's design undermined its story. Mechanics actively punished exploration, players lost health by running, and battles often felt mandatory rather than meaningful. The narrative, already thin, struggled to stand out against systems that drained enjoyment. Fans who cherished the emotional depth of Lunar Silver Story or Eternal Blue found Dragon Song hollow, disconnected from the franchise's strengths. Critics echoed this, noting that the game lacked the warmth and character focus that defined the series. Community feedback suggested the story needed a stronger character arcs, more engaging dialogue, and mechanics that supported rather than hindered immersion. Many found that handheld limitations weren't the issue. The problem was prioritizing grind over narrative, leaving the game remembered as one of the weakest entries in a beloved series. Case Study 5. Paper Mario Sticker Star 2012. Nintendo's Sticker Star marked a sharp departure from the series' tradition of charming, story-driven RPGs. The developers aimed to simplify mechanics and focus on puzzle-like sticker combat, believing this would make the game more accessible to a wider audience. Story elements were deliberately minimized with the intent of keeping gameplay front and center. The result was a narrative that felt almost absent. Longtime fans, who cherished the humor and character depth of the Thousand-Year Door, found Sticker Star shallow and disconnected. Dialogue was sparse, characters lacked personality, and the world offered little emotional engagement. Critics noted that while the mechanics were novel, the stripped-down story left the game feeling hollow compared to its predecessors. Community feedback consistently called for richer character interactions, a return to companion-driven storytelling, and more meaningful dialogue. Many argued that accessibility didn't require sacrificing narrative charm, and that the series' identity was built on balancing quirky humor with heartfelt storytelling. Case Study 6. Final Fantasy Type 0 2015. Square Enix positioned Type 0 as a darker, more mature entry in the Final Fantasy series, aiming to explore themes of war, sacrifice, and mortality. The narrative was built around Class 0, a group of elite students thrust into conflict with the intention of delivering a gritty, emotional story that stood apart from the franchise's usual tone. Despite its ambition, the story was widely criticized for being convoluted and difficult to follow. Characters were introduced with little development, dialogue often feeling incoherent, and a plot demanding multiple playthroughs to grasp its full scope. While some players appreciated the attempt at a heavier tone, many found the execution confusing and emotionally distant. Critics noted that the game's storytelling lacked clarity, leaving audiences divided between admiration for its ambition and frustration at its delivery. Community feedback suggested the narrative needed stronger character focus, clearer pacing, and more accessible dialogue to balance its darker themes. Fans argued that the game could have succeeded if its complexity had been paired with emotional grounding, rather than relying on obscurity to convey depth. When Ephemeral Fantasia tried to build its story around a repeating time loop, the idea was ambitious, but the execution left players frustrated. By contrast, Majora's Mask, released the exact same year, showed how repetition could deepen character arcs and world building. Each cycle revealed new emotional layers, turning the mechanic into a source of meaning rather than punishment. The lesson here is that innovation only works when it builds momentum and connection, not when it erases progress. With Unlimited Saga, Square Enix leaned into complex systems that buried the narrative under mechanics. Players found themselves overwhelmed, unable to connect with the story. Just a year earlier, Final Fantasy X demonstrated the opposite. It balanced intricate systems with a clear, emotionally resonant plot, guiding players through mechanics while keeping the story accessible. The takeaway is that bold design must support clarity, or else the narrative impact is lost. Suikoden 4 scaled down its scope, focusing on smaller parties and a naval setting, but failed to compensate with deeper character development. Fans compared it unfavorably to Suikoden 2 and later Suikoden 5, both of which delivered ensemble casts with rich interactions that anchored political conflicts in personal stories. The contrast shows that reducing scale demands stronger character focus to preserve the heart of a franchise. When Lunar Dragon Song arrived on the DS, its mechanics actively punished exploration, draining the joy from discovery. Earlier entries like Lunar Silver Star Story thrived because they rewarded curiosity and emphasized heartfelt bonds. The difference highlights how mechanics could reinforce narrative themes, not undermine them, and how punishing design can strip a series of its soul. Paper Mario Sticker Star minimized story to focus on sticker-based combat, but in doing so it erased the quirky humor and comparison-driven charm that defined the series. Fans pointed to the Thousand Year Door as proof that accessibility doesn't require sacrificing narrative depth. The game balanced simplicity with personality, showing that humor and character interaction are essential to the franchise's identity. Finally, Final Fantasy Type 0 aimed for a darker, more mature tone, but delivered a convoluted, confusing narrative. In contrast, Final Fantasy X offered clarity and emotional resonance through focused character arcs, while Final Fantasy XV balanced heavy themes with accessible pacing and grounded relationships. These comparisons underline that mature storytelling needs clarity and emotional grounding. Obscurity alone does not create depth. Looking across these studies, a clear pattern emerges. Ambition alone doesn't guarantee a memorable story. Whether it's a time loop mechanic, stripped down accessibility, or darker themes, each experiment faltered when clarity and emotional grounding were lost. The strongest RPGs remind us that mechanics and narrative must work together, each reinforcing the other to keep players invested. When stories fail, players don't just critique the writing, they question the identity of the franchise itself. Yet when stories succeed, even simple systems can feel profound because they carry emotional weight. The lesson is that players don't remember the grind or the mechanics as much as they remember the journey, the bonds, and the meaning behind their choices. And so the question lingers. In a genre built on worlds and characters, what truly makes a story worth carrying with us long after the credits roll? Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.